In the hallways of Westfield High School, Marcus Washington was just the man who mopped floors and fixed lockers, invisible to the students who passed him daily. But beneath the janitor's uniform beat the heart of a Delta Force legend with missions so classified they'd never see daylight. When armed intruders lock down the school with military precision, they expect terrified teenagers and helpless staff. Instead, they find themselves in a deadly chess match against the one man who knows every inch of the building because he designed its hidden defenses. As gunshots echo through the corridors, Marcus transforms from silent custodian to tactical commander, recruiting the football team as his unlikely strike force. What the attackers don't realize, this school was secretly built as a fortress after Sandy Hook, and its principal is Marcus's former commanding officer. They see a janitor with a mop, Marcus tells his teenage defenders as he hands out improvised weapons. They don't see the man who once rescued hostages from warlords with nothing but a paperclip and pure nerve. The clock is ticking. The students are watching. And the janitor is done being invisible. Drop a comment telling us where you're reading from. Hit that subscribe button now. Tomorrow's story will take you inside an FBI hostage negotiation gone terribly wrong. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Marcus Washington pushed his mop bucket down the empty hallway of Westfield High, the rhythmic squeak of his worn boots against freshly waxed tiles the only sound in the quiet evening. At 55, his broad shoulders carried the weight of decades, some visible, most hidden, and his dark, weathered hands moved with the precision of a man who had long mastered the art of working without being seen. The students who rushed past him every day barely registered his presence, their laughter and chatter flowing around him like water around a stone. To them, he was just the janitor, the silent figure who fixed broken lockers, unclogged toilets, and wiped away the messes they left behind without complaint. But beneath the navy blue uniform and the steady, unhurried movements was a mind still sharpened by years of tactical training, a body that remembered the weight of a rifle, and instincts that never fully slept. He paused by a scuff mark on the wall, fresh, likely from some overexcited kid shoving his friend between classes, and rubbed at it with a practiced twist of his rag until it vanished. The school was his domain, every chip in the paint, every loose floor tile, every flickering light fixture catalogued in his mind. He knew which doors stuck in the winter, which windows rattled in the wind, and which corners of the building were blind spots for the security cameras. Not that the administration had ever asked, but if they had, he could have drawn them a blueprint of Westfield High from memory, complete with every possible entry and exit point, every vulnerability. Old habits died hard. A flicker of movement outside the window caught his eye. He didn't react, didn't tense, just kept wiping down the lockers as he turned his head slightly, letting his peripheral vision do the work. Two black SUVs, unmarked, moving slowly along the perimeter of the school parking lot. No lights, no decals, just dark-tinted windows reflecting the sunset. They didn't belong here. Not at this hour, not in this way. His fingers tightened imperceptibly around the mop handle before he forced them to relax. Could be nothing. Could be parents waiting for a late practice to end, or some contractors making a delivery. But his spine knew better. That slow, deliberate circling wasn't casual. It was reconnaissance. A memory flashed, hot, desert wind, the acrid tang of gunpowder, the weight of a radio headset pressing into his ear as he whispered coordinates to a drone operator half a world away. He blinked it away. That life was buried. Still, his body remembered. His pulse stayed steady, but his senses sharpened, scanning for more details. The SUVs had paused near the rear fire exit, the one with the broken alarm that the district still hadn't approved funds to fix. He'd reported it 3 times. The bell for after-school activities had rung an hour ago. Most of the students were gone, save for a few stragglers in the gym or the library. The faculty parking lot was thinning out, too. Principal Coleman's car, though, that old blue Buick, was still in its usual spot. Marcus exhaled slowly. Raymond Coleman. The name carried its own weight. They'd never spoken about the past, not directly, but the recognition had been there the day Marcus showed up for the janitor job 5 years ago, fresh off a bus with a duffel bag and a silence that didn't invite questions. Coleman had taken one look at him, seen something in the way Marcus stood, the way his eyes flicked to the corners of the room, and given a nearly imperceptible nod. The paperwork had been processed without a word. Marcus moved down the hall toward the main office, his footsteps silent on the tiles. He could hear Coleman's voice through the door, talking to someone, probably a parent or a teacher staying late. He hesitated. If he walked in there now and said what he was thinking, it would change everything. The careful anonymity he'd built, the quiet life of fixing things and staying out of the way. It would be over. But the SUVs were still out there, and his instincts hadn't been wrong yet. He turned away. For now, he'd watch. He'd wait. But as he headed back toward the utility closet to stow his mop, his fingers brushed against the old flip phone buried deep in his pocket, the one he'd kept charged for years, just in case. Just in case the world ever came knocking again. Outside, the SUVs made another slow pass. The pre-dawn light filtered through the blinds of Marcus Washington's one-bedroom apartment, casting thin stripes of gray across the bare walls. He had been awake for hours. Sleep had never come easy, not after 2 decades of missions where closing your eyes for too long could mean never opening them again. His body still operated on the rhythm of a soldier, wired to function on minimal rest, always alert even in stillness. The apartment was sparse, utilitarian, a twin bed with tight hospital corners, a small kitchenette with dishes that were always clean and put away, a single armchair facing a television that rarely turned on. There were no family photos, no personal trinkets, nothing that spoke of a life outside these walls. Except for one thing. Against the far wall stood a bookshelf, unassuming at first glance, but to anyone who knew what to look for, it told a different story. The spines of the books were neatly aligned, their titles a mix of military strategy, psychology, and survival manuals. Sun Tzu's The Art of War sat beside On Combat by Dave Grossman, a well-worn copy of the Ranger Handbook tucked beside them. Below the books were a series of black notebooks, their pages filled with Marcus's precise handwriting, notes on tactics, observations, security assessments. One of them contained a detailed map of Westfield High, annotated with potential weak points, escape routes, and defensive positions. Old habits didn't just die hard, they never died at all. He rose from the bed, his movements silent, automatic. The floorboards didn't creak beneath his feet, he'd memorized their weak spots long ago. In the bathroom, he splashed cold water on his face and studied his reflection in the mirror. The face staring back was one that had aged beyond its years. Deep lines around his eyes, a scar just above his left eyebrow, a jaw that still clenched unconsciously when his mind wandered too far into the past. He exhaled slowly, forcing the tension out of his shoulders. Today was Saturday. The diner was a relic of a bygone era, vinyl booths, a jukebox in the corner that still played actual records, the scent of coffee and bacon thick in the air. Marcus slid into his usual booth at the back, the one with a clear line of sight to both the front door and the emergency exit. Old habits. Principal Raymond Coleman was already there, nursing a cup of black coffee, his reading glasses perched on the edge of his nose as he scanned the local newspaper. He didn't look up as Marcus sat down, but the corner of his mouth twitched in acknowledgement. "You're late," Coleman said, his voice gruff but not unkind. Marcus checked his watch. 6:03 a.m. He wasn't late. He was never late. But this was part of their routine, the same dry greeting every week. "Traffic," Marcus replied, deadpan. Coleman snorted and finally looked up, his sharp blue eyes assessing. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with a military bearing that even retirement and a principal's suit couldn't hide. His hair had gone fully gray now, but his posture was still that of a man who had once led soldiers into combat. He and Marcus had never served together directly, but they moved in the same circles, the kind where names were rarely spoken and recognition came in the form of a shared silence. The waitress, a middle-aged woman named Darla who had long since stopped trying to make small talk with them, slid a cup of coffee in front of Marcus. He nodded his thanks. "You see the news?" Coleman asked, folding the paper and pushing it toward Marcus. A headline near the bottom caught his eye. "Local school board addresses online threats. No credible danger, officials say." Marcus took a slow sip of coffee. "Vague." Coleman leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping. "Not as vague as they'd like. Got a call from the superintendent last night. Some chatter online, specific threats. Not just the usual nonsense." Marcus didn't react outwardly, but his mind was already working, analyzing. How specific? Mentions of Westfield by name. References to making a statement. Coleman's jaw tightened. "They're calling it a prank." Marcus set his cup down carefully. "You don't." Coleman exhaled through his nose. "I've seen pranks. This isn't that." A silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken understanding. Marcus's fingers tapped once against the table, a subconscious tell, the only outward sign of the storm brewing beneath his calm exterior. "You still got that old .45 in your desk." Marcus asked quietly. Coleman didn't blink. Locked and loaded. Another beat of silence. Then Marcus nodded just once. That was all that needed to be said. The rest of the morning passed in routine. Marcus drove to the hardware store, picked up supplies for a leaky faucet in the girls' locker room, stopped by the grocery store for the bare essentials. To anyone watching, he was just a quiet, solitary man going about his day. But his eyes never stopped moving, never stopped assessing. The black SUVs from yesterday were gone, but their presence lingered in the back of his mind like an itch he couldn't scratch. Back at his apartment, he methodically cleaned his Glock 19, the one firearm he allowed himself to keep registered under a name that wasn't quite his. The motions were meditative, familiar. As he reassembled the weapon, his mind drifted back to the mission that had ended his career. Kabul, 2012. A schoolhouse in the middle of the city, hostages taken by insurgents. Children inside. His team had been sent in to extract. They had intelligence, a layout of the building, a plan. But intelligence was wrong. The explosives had been rigged to the doors. They'd lost 3 men before they even breached. And then the gunfire, the screams. Marcus's hands stilled. He forced himself to breathe. That had been the last time he'd pulled a trigger in the field. The last time he'd let himself be responsible for lives beyond his own. He had walked away after that, disappeared into the anonymity of civilian life, telling himself he was done. But the world had a way of pulling men like him back in. That night, as he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he heard it, the distant rumble of an engine idling outside his apartment complex. Too late for visitors. Too quiet for a delivery. He didn't move. Didn't tense. Just listened. The engine shut off. A car door opened, then closed. Marcus exhaled slowly. Tomorrow was Sunday. A day of rest. But something told him rest was no longer an option. The rain hammered against the windows of Principal Coleman's office 3 years ago, the storm outside mirroring the tension in the room as Marcus Washington sat across from him, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. He hadn't expected the call, hadn't expected anyone from his old life to track him down, let alone Raymond Coleman, a man he'd only known by reputation. But there he was, sitting in a too-small chair in a high school office, listening as Coleman laid out the proposition with the same clipped efficiency he'd once used to brief operatives before a mission. "We rebuilt this place after the district got hit with a credible shooting threat," Coleman had said, pushing blueprints across the desk, blueprints that didn't match the school's public floor plans. Federal money, private contractors, zero public disclosure. On paper, it's just a renovation. In reality, it's a fortress. Marcus had studied the schematics in silence, his fingers tracing the hidden panic rooms, the reinforced load-bearing walls designed to slow an armed breach, the ventilation system that could be sealed off in case of a chemical attack. It was overkill for a high school. Or maybe not. Maybe it was exactly what the world demanded now. "I need someone who knows how to use it," Coleman had said, watching him carefully. "Someone who sees what others don't." Marcus had said nothing for a long moment. Then he nodded just once. And just like that, he became the janitor of Westfield High. Now, years later, the school's secrets were as familiar to him as the scars on his own hands. Every morning before the students arrived, Marcus moved through the building like a ghost, his routine as precise as any military patrol. He checked the hidden panels in the walls, false sections that opened to reveal emergency medical kits, radios, even stashed firearms, all locked behind biometric scanners keyed to his fingerprints and Coleman's. He tested the silent alarm triggers disguised as ordinary light switches, the ones that would lock every classroom door and alert local law enforcement without setting off a single audible siren. He inspected the reinforced safe zones in the library and gymnasium, areas built to withstand gunfire and by time for evacuation. To anyone else, Westfield High looked like any other school, brightly colored banners in the hallways, scuffed linoleum floors, the hum of fluorescent lights. But Marcus knew the truth. This place had been designed for war. Today, like every day, he finished his rounds just as the first buses pulled in, the students spilling out in a wave of laughter and backpacks and half-awake grumbling. He faded into the background as they passed, just another fixture of the school's daily rhythm, invisible as always. But his eyes never stopped moving, never stopped assessing. He noted the broken camera near the east stairwell. He needed to fix that. The jammed door in the science wing, another vulnerability. And then there was the football team, their loud presence dominating the hallway as they shoved each other playfully, their coach, Bill Owens, barking orders with the same gruff intensity Marcus had seen in drill sergeants. Owens was a former Marine, though he never talked about it. Marcus had recognized the signs immediately, the way he stood, the way his eyes flicked to exits instinctively. They'd never spoken about it, but there was an unspoken respect there. Sometimes when practice ran late, Marcus would linger near the field, watching the players drill. They were strong, fast, disciplined. In another life, they might have made good soldiers. But it wasn't the star quarterback who caught Marcus's attention today. It was Jamal Reynolds, a lanky sophomore with a sharp mind and a target on his back. Marcus had seen it before, the way the other kids whispered about him, the way they accidentally shoved him into lockers, the way they'd stolen his shoes last week and left them dangling from the bleachers. Jamal never fought back, never even reported it. He just took it, his shoulders hunched like he'd learned to make himself smaller. Marcus understood that, too. He didn't intervene directly. That wasn't his role. But when he saw Jamal's backpack dumped in the hallway later that afternoon, its contents scattered across the floor, he knelt beside it without a word and began repacking it, slowly, methodically. Jamal froze when he saw him, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and shame. "They'll keep coming if you let them," Marcus said quietly, not looking up as he zipped the bag shut. "But you don't have to let them." He pressed something into Jamal's hand, a small, unremarkable key. "Locker 217. It's empty. Combination's your birth date. Use it when you need to." Jamal stared at him, bewildered, but Marcus was already walking away, his mop slung over his shoulder like a rifle. Locker 217 was in a blind spot for the cameras. And inside, tucked behind the ventilation grate, was a burner phone with one number pre-programmed. Just in case. By the time the final bell rang, the school was empty again, the echoes of slamming lockers and shouted goodbyes fading into silence. Marcus moved through the halls once more, this time with a different purpose. He stopped at a seemingly ordinary section of wall near the auditorium, pressed his palm against a hidden scanner, and waited as a panel clicked open. Inside was a monitor, its screen displaying a live feed of every security camera in the building. He studied it for a long moment, his gaze lingering on the black SUVs that had returned, idling near the faculty parking lot. Then he closed the panel, his expression grim. Tomorrow was Monday, the start of another week. But Marcus had a feeling this week would be different. The morning bell rang through Westfield High, its shrill tone cutting through the chatter of students flooding the hallways, backpacks slung over shoulders, sneakers squeaking against freshly mopped floors as Marcus Washington moved through the crowd like a shadow, his presence unnoticed, but his eyes missing nothing. Darius Johnson, the star quarterback with a grin that could charm the entire school, high-fived his teammates as he passed, his natural charisma drawing people to him like a magnet. There was a leader in him, Marcus noted, the kind who didn't yet realize he could inspire more than just touchdowns. Zoe Chun, her fingers flying across her phone as she snapped candid shots for the yearbook, had a gaze that lingered just a second too long on details others ignored, the flickering light in the science wing, the unfamiliar face loitering near the gym, the way the janitor's routine had shifted subtly in the past week. She didn't know what it meant, but she cataloged it all the same. Near the lockers, Jamal Williams kept his head down, his shoulders tense as he navigated the halls with the practiced wariness of someone who expected a shove or a cruel joke at any moment. But there was a new hardness in his eyes now, a quiet defiance that hadn't been there before, and Marcus allowed himself a fraction of satisfaction at the sight. And then there was Katie Alvarez, the student council president, her voice calm but firm as she mediated an argument between two freshmen, her hands moving in steady gestures that seemed to dissolve tension on contact. Crisis management came naturally to her, a skill Marcus knew would be invaluable if the storm he sensed ever broke. The day unfolded with the ordinary chaos of high school, pop quizzes in history class, the sharp tang of chemicals from the chemistry lab, the rhythmic thud of basketballs in the gym during PE. Marcus moved through it all, his mop bucket rolling beside him, his posture relaxed but his senses sharp. It was during his third pass by the boys' bathroom near the east wing that he heard it, a low, murmured conversation, the words too deliberate to be casual. He paused, his grip tightening imperceptibly on the mop handle as he caught fragments through the door. Cameras are on a loop after 4, and alarms won't trigger if you cut the power first. And then, the one that sent a cold ripple down his spine. They won't expect it from the inside. The voices fell silent as someone pushed open the door, and Marcus was already halfway down the hall, his back turned, his pace unhurried. He didn't look back, but his mind was racing. Whoever had been in there knew the school's security weaknesses. And that meant they'd done their homework. By the time the final bell rang and the last stragglers trickled out to the parking lot, Marcus was in the maintenance closet, his fingers flying over the keyboard of the hidden security terminal he'd rigged years ago, a system even the district IT team didn't know existed. The footage from the past week played across the screen in fast forward, and then he saw it. Shadowed figures moving along the perimeter after hours, testing doors, lingering near the electrical panels. They wore hoodies, their faces obscured, but their movements were methodical, practiced. This wasn't kids messing around. This was reconnaissance. He isolated the clearest frames, zoomed in, no visible weapons, but the way one of them moved suggested something heavy tucked under his jacket. Marcus exhaled slowly, then reached for the secure landline that connected directly to Principal Coleman's office. Coleman answered on the first ring. "You see it too," he said, no greeting necessary. "They're casing the place," Marcus replied, his voice low. "And they've got inside knowledge." A beat of silence. Then Coleman's voice, grim but steady. "We can't lock it down without tipping our hand." "Not yet." Marcus knew he was right. A full-scale alert would panic students, draw media attention, maybe even spook their enemies into acting sooner. But doing nothing wasn't an option. "We stay sharp," he said. "You keep an eye on staff. I'll watch the kids. And if they make a move—" Coleman asked, though they both knew the answer. Marcus's fingers brushed against the Glock, hidden in his toolbox. "Then they'll learn why this school was built the way it was." He hung up and stepped back into the hallway, the empty school stretching out around him, silent but for the distant hum of the HVAC system. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the linoleum. Somewhere out there, danger was circling closer. But for now, there was still calm, and Marcus intended to use every second of it. The morning sun cast long shadows across Westfield High's parking lot as Marcus Washington pushed his cleaning cart along the senior hallway, his sharp eyes noting the unfamiliar vehicles parked near the service entrance, two nondescript white vans with tinted windows and out-of-state plates, engines still warm despite the early hour. He made a mental note of their positions, his soldiers' instincts prickling at the way they were angled for quick exits rather than casual visits, but he kept moving, his face a mask of calm indifference as students streamed past him, oblivious to the danger their janitor sensed brewing beneath the surface of the ordinary school day. Darius Johnson laughed with his teammates near the water fountain, his booming voice carrying down the hall, while Zoe Chun frowned at her phone, tapping impatiently at a frozen screen as the school's Wi-Fi stuttered, a minor glitch that would later reveal itself as the first sign of something far more sinister. In classroom 214, Jamal Williams sat rigid at his desk, his fingers drumming an anxious rhythm as he glanced repeatedly at the clock, while in the main office, Katie Alvarez organized emergency drill paperwork, unaware that the real thing would soon render her preparations tragically inadequate. The clock ticked toward 10:14 a.m. with agonizing normalcy, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, the murmur of teachers' voices explaining algebra equations and Shakespearean sonnets, creating a deceptive bubble of safety that was about to shatter. At precisely 10:14, the power died with a quiet sigh, not the dramatic flicker of a typical outage, but a surgical cut that plunged the entire building into silence so complete Marcus could hear the sudden hitch in breathing from nearby classrooms. His body moved before his mind fully processed the threat, his boots carrying him swiftly toward the basement stairwell as the school's PA system crackled weakly before falling silent, the standard lockdown announcement dying in its throat. The emergency lights flickered on, casting eerie blue shadows that did nothing to illuminate the truth now crashing down around them. This was no drill, no accident. Marcus was halfway down the stairs when the first gunshot rang out, its sharp report unmistakable even through concrete walls, followed by two more in rapid succession, controlled, disciplined bursts that spoke of professional training rather than panic violence. The screams started then, distant but growing closer, a wave of terror rolling through the building as students and teachers alike realized their worst nightmares had come to life. Marcus didn't hesitate. Slamming through the basement door, he ripped open a seemingly ordinary electrical panel to reveal a biometric scanner, his calloused fingers flying over the keypad as the hidden compartment hissed open, presenting him with a compact radio unit and a sleek earpiece, technology years beyond what any school district could afford. "Coleman's status," he barked into the receiver, his voice stripped of all pretense of being just a janitor as he strapped on a concealed ballistic vest from the compartment's depths. Static crackled for one heart-stopping moment before the principal's voice came through, tight with controlled fury. North entry breached, at least 4 hostiles, all armed. They're herding students toward the gym. Marcus's jaw clenched as he grabbed a compact handgun from a cache, checking the magazine with practiced efficiency. They were making a kill zone, just like in the drills he'd studied, just like in missions he'd run overseas. "Initiate Protocol Shadow," Coleman ordered, referencing their private contingency plan, and Marcus was already moving, slipping through the maintenance tunnels that webbed beneath the school, his mind racing through every possible scenario even as his body moved with lethal precision. The tunnel dumped him into a janitorial closet near the science wing, and Marcus paused just long enough to press his eye to the security mirror angled in the door's viewport, a simple device he'd installed years ago that now revealed the unfolding nightmare in the hallway beyond. A figure in black tactical gear moved with chilling efficiency, his rifle sweeping methodically as he checked classrooms, his movements too disciplined, too practiced to be some lone gunman. Marcus's blood ran cold as he recognized the tactical crouch, the controlled breathing, the way the man cleared corners. This was military training, or something damn close to it. The attacker's head snapped up suddenly, as if sensing the weight of Marcus's gaze, and for one frozen second, their eyes met in the distorted reflection of the mirror, predator recognizing predator. Then the moment shattered as the man raised his rifle and fired, the bullet punching through the thin closet door just as Marcus threw himself sideways, the impact spraying splinters where his head had been. Heart pounding but mind eerily calm, Marcus keyed his radio as he assessed his options. Hostiles are professionals. They know the layout. Coleman's response was immediate. Then it's good we know it better. Somewhere above them, another volley of gunfire echoed, followed by the panicked screams of students, and Marcus felt the last vestiges of his civilian persona fall away as he chambered around and prepared to step into the hallway, not as a janitor, not as a ghost, but as the weapon he'd always been. The first bell had rung that morning to start another ordinary day. Now the real battle had begun. The maintenance tunnels beneath Westfield High swallowed Marcus whole as he moved like a shadow through the dim glow of emergency lighting, his breathing steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. This was familiar territory, both literally and figuratively, the narrow passageways feeling more like the corridors of some long-abandoned forward operating base than the underbelly of a suburban high school. The scent of damp concrete and industrial cleaner mixed with the acrid tang of his own sweat as he navigated the labyrinth he'd memorized years ago. Every turn, every junction etched into his muscle memory, his free hand trailing along the cold pipes lining the walls as if they were guide ropes in a minefield. Somewhere above him, the sporadic staccato of gunfire and the muffled screams of students painted a nightmare tableau he'd seen before, in Kabul, in Mosul, in places he'd tried to leave behind. But this time the battlefield was a place meant for algebra tests and pep rallies, and the civilians in the crosshairs were kids who never signed up for war. The radio earpiece crackled with Coleman's voice, the principal's usually measured tone stripped bare to reveal the steel beneath. Marcus' status. Marcus didn't waste words as he reached a reinforced steel door marked Boiler Room. Authorized personnel only, his fingers flying over the keypad hidden beneath the warning sign. 2 minutes out. Hostiles are funneling students toward the gym. This is coordinated. The door hissed open on well-oiled hinges, revealing not a boiler room, but a narrow staircase leading up to the administrative wing, another one of the school's carefully concealed secrets, and Marcus took the steps 2 at a time, his weapon held low and ready as he ascended toward what passed for a command post in this waking nightmare. Coleman's office looked like a war room when Marcus burst in, the principal standing over a blown-up schematic of the school spread across his desk, his suit jacket discarded to reveal the shoulder holster beneath, his face all hard angles and grim determination in the flickering light of battery-powered lanterns. The window blinds were drawn tight, the computer monitors dark. They were running on emergency power now, cut off from the outside world, but the two men locked eyes, and in that moment needed no explanation. This was the scenario they'd trained for, the nightmare they'd hoped would never come. Communications are down campus-wide, Coleman said, tapping the map where red X's marked known attacker positions. Cell towers jammed, landlines dead. They knew exactly where to hit us. Marcus studied the schematic, his mind overlaying years of tactical experience onto the blueprints. They'll have lookouts at every exit, probably rigged the main doors to blow if we try to evacuate. Standard siege protocol. Coleman nodded, his jaw tightening as another burst of gunfire echoed faintly through the walls, closer this time. Police response. Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. Delayed, Coleman spat. 911 calls are getting rerouted to a dead line. This is professional. The two men stood in silence for a heartbeat, the weight of their shared understanding settling between them. This wasn't some disaffected student with a stolen handgun. This was a military-grade assault on American soil, and they were the only thing standing between those kids and a massacre. It was Coleman who broke the silence, straightening to his full height and fixing Marcus with a look that brooked no argument. "You're taking point." Marcus opened his mouth to protest, but Coleman cut him off with a slash of his hand. "Don't bullshit me, Sergeant. I may have the rank, but you've got the recent field experience. These kids need Delta right now, not some desk jockey who hasn't seen action since Desert Storm." The use of Marcus's old title hit like a punch to the gut, but he didn't flinch, just gave a sharp nod as Coleman reached into his desk drawer and produced a small black box, the kind that usually held expensive watches, but when Coleman flipped it open, it revealed 2 silver keys and single red button protected by a clear plastic cover. "Protocol Echo," Coleman said, sliding one key across the desk to Marcus. "You know where to go." Marcus pocketed the key without hesitation. They drilled this scenario a dozen times over the years, always in secret, always with the unspoken hope they'd never need it. Protocol Echo was their nuclear option, the break glass in case of emergency plan that turned Westfield High from a school into a fortress and its caretakers into soldiers once more. The radio on Coleman's desk crackled to life suddenly, a panic voice cutting through the static. "Principal Coleman, this is Coach Owens in the gym. We've got about 200 kids packed in here, and I just saw armed men outside the doors. What the hell do I do?" Coleman grabbed the receiver, his voice ironclad with authority. "Hold position, Bill. Barricade the doors and wait for my signal." He locked eyes with Marcus as he set the radio down. "Go. I'll coordinate from here." Marcus didn't waste time with goodbyes, just turned on his heel and moved back toward the door, but Coleman's voice stopped him one last time. "Marcus, bring our boys home." The weight of those words, an old military send-off that had followed them both through countless deployments, hung heavy in the air as Marcus slipped into the hallway, his civilian persona sloughing away like dead skin as he moved with purpose toward the janitor's closet near the math wing. The closet was exactly as he'd left it that morning, mops leaning against the wall, cleaning supplies neatly arranged, the faint scent of bleach hanging in the air. But Marcus went straight to the back wall, where a seemingly ordinary locker stood. Inserting the silver key Coleman had given him, he turned it counterclockwise until he heard a soft click, then pressed his palm flat against the cold metal. The biometric scanner hidden beneath the paint registered his print with a nearly silent beep, and the entire locker front swung open to reveal what Marcus had hoped he'd never see again, a full tactical loadout, matte black and deadly serious. His fingers traced the familiar contours of the armored vest, the compact assault rifle, the smoke grenades and first aid kit, every piece meticulously maintained over the years, waiting for this unthinkable moment. For a heartbeat, Marcus hesitated, staring at the gear like it was a ghost from his past, but then another burst of gunfire echoed through the school, closer this time, followed by a scream that ended too abruptly. His hands didn't shake as he reached for the vest, his movements precise and practiced as he strapped himself back into the life he'd tried to leave behind, the life that had never really let him go. The final piece was the rifle, its weight both foreign and intimately familiar in his hands as he checked the magazine and chambered around with a smooth, practiced motion. Somewhere in the building, kids were dying. Somewhere in the building, the enemy was advancing. And Marcus Washington, the invisible janitor, the forgotten soldier, was done hiding. The service corridors of Westfield High had never felt so claustrophobic as Marcus moved through them with his rifle at the ready, the weight of his tactical gear both foreign and achingly familiar against his body, the dim emergency lighting casting long shadows that seemed to pulse with every distant gunshot reverberating through the walls. He moved like liquid darkness, his boots silent on the concrete floor, his senses hyper-alert to every creak of the building's infrastructure. This was his domain, these hidden arteries of the school he maintained for years, and now they were his battlefield once more. The gymnasium loomed ahead, its double doors barricaded with what looked like wrestling mats and folded bleachers, a makeshift fortress that spoke of desperation rather than strategy, and Marcus could already hear the muffled voices inside, some panicked, some trying to maintain order, all unaware that salvation was approaching in the form of a man they'd ignored for years. He paused at the door, pressing his ear against the cold metal to listen. Footsteps moving in controlled patterns, heavy breathing, the occasional whimper of fear. Then rapped 3 sharp knocks in specific rhythm, the coded signal he and Coleman had established long ago for exactly this kind of situation. The noises inside stilled for a heartbeat before Coach Owen's voice barked through the door, low and dangerous. "Identify yourself or I put a bullet through this door." Marcus didn't flinch, just leaned closer and kept his voice calm but firm. "It's Washington. Coleman sent me." The silence that followed was thick with disbelief. Then came the sound of heavy objects being dragged aside before the door cracked open just enough to reveal Owen's face, his usually jovial features now drawn tight with stress, his service revolver held steady in one hand as his eyes widened at the sight of Marcus in full tactical gear. "What the actual hell?" Owens began, but Marcus was already pushing past him into the gym, his sharp eyes taking in the scene in one sweeping glance. 200 students huddled in terrified clusters, the football team forming a loose perimeter around them, their faces pale but determined, their bodies tense with adrenaline they didn't know how to channel. The moment Marcus stepped into the light, a ripple went through the crowd, first confusion, then shock as they recognized the school janitor now clad in black armor and carrying a weapon that belonged on a battlefield. Darius Johnson was the first to find his voice, the star quarterback's usual confidence replaced by stunned disbelief. "Mr. Washington?" "What the—" But Marcus cut him off with a raised hand, his entire demeanor shifting from invisible caretaker to battlefield commander in the space of a heartbeat. "Listen up," his voice carried across the gym without shouting, a tone honed by years of giving orders in life-or-death situations, and something in its timbre made even the most panicked students fall silent. "We don't have time for explanations. What you need to know is this: the people attacking this school are professionals, and they're here to kill as many of us as they can." A collective gasp went through the crowd, but Marcus continued, his gaze locking onto individual faces. Zoe Chun sitting frozen with her camera still clutched in shaking hands, Jamal Williams watching him with dawning understanding, Katie Alvarez already moving to comfort a sobbing freshman. "Police responses delayed," Marcus said, omitting the part about communications being jammed. "No need to feed their panic. Which means we're on our own until help arrives." Coach Owen stepped forward, his revolver still in hand, but his stance less confrontational now. "Marcus, what exactly are you proposing? These are kids, not soldiers." Marcus met his gaze evenly. "They're football players, Bill. They know discipline. They know teamwork. And right now, that's all I need." Turning back to the team, Marcus pointed at Darius. "Johnson, how many of your guys can bench over 200 pounds? The quarterback blinked, then rattled off 5 names without hesitation. Marcus nodded. "Your team alpha. You'll be our heavy movers." His finger swung to Zoe, who startled at being addressed directly. "Chun, you know this building better than anyone. Where are the blind spots in the security cameras?" Her answer came fast, her tech-savvy mind overriding her fear. "East stairwell camera's been out for weeks, and there's a dead zone near the drama club storage." Marcus didn't smile, but there was approval in his eyes. "Team Beta. You're our eyes and ears." Like a general assessing his troops, Marcus moved through the room, dividing the students not by popularity or social standing, but by raw capability. The track team became rapid responders, the debate team was tasked with keeping morale up and relaying messages, the theater kids with their stage combat training were shown basic disarming techniques. The transformation was staggering. Where moments ago there had been panicked children, now there was the bare bones of a resistance taking shape, their fear channeled into purpose under Marcus's commanding presence. The real training began in brutal simplicity, Marcus demonstrating how to move in a tactical column, how to clear a room, how to use everyday objects as weapons. "A fire extinguisher isn't just for fires," he said, hefting one with deadly intent. "A chair isn't just for sitting." He showed them how to fashion tourniquets from belts, how to apply pressure to wounds, how to carry the injured without exacerbating their trauma. The football players absorbed it fastest, their athleticism translating well to the physical demands, but Marcus was surprised to see Jamal picking up the tactical movements with natural precision, his lanky frame moving with unexpected grace as he mimicked Marcus's stances. "You've done this before," Marcus observed quietly, and Jamal met his gaze with a hardness that hadn't been there before. "Not this exactly. But I know what it's like to always be watching your back." There was a story there, one Marcus filed away for later, if there was a later. As the students practiced in hushed intensity, Marcus pulled Owens aside near the equipment lockers, keeping his voice low. "We need to move soon." They'll come for the gym eventually. It's too big a target to ignore. Owens nodded, his face grim. What's the play? Marcus's eyes flicked to the students, then back. We can't evacuate 200 kids through the halls, not with shooters roaming free. But we can draw them away, give the others a chance to escape. Understanding dawned in Owens' eyes. You want to use my team as bait. It wasn't a question. Marcus shook his head. I want to use them as what they are, the strongest, fastest, most disciplined fighters we've got. A shout from across the gym interrupted them. Darius and his teammates had formed a protective circle around the younger students, their bodies tense, but their faces set in determination. Marcus watched them for a long moment before speaking again. They're already stepping up. All I'm doing is giving them the tools to survive. Returning to the center of the gym, Marcus raised his hand for silence. The students fell quiet instantly, their eyes fixed on him with a mix of fear and something new, something like hope. Here's the situation, he said, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. The attackers want us scared. They want us helpless. But we're not going to give them that. He paced as he spoke, his gaze locking onto individual faces. Team Alpha, you're with me. We're going to draw their attention while Team Bravo secures the escape route through the maintenance tunnels. A murmur went through the crowd, but Marcus continued. Team Charlie, you're on medical duty. Anyone gets hurt, you're their lifeline. Team Delta, you're guarding this position until we give the all clear. He stopped pacing and faced them all, his expression unreadable behind the tactical gear, but his voice carrying absolute conviction. This isn't what any of you signed up for. But today, you're not students. You're not players. Today, you're defenders. The words hung in the air like a vow, and in that moment, something shifted in the room. Shoulders straightened, jaws set, hands clenched into fists. They were scared, yes, but they were ready. Marcus checked his rifle with a practice motion, the sound of the chambered round clicking home the final punctuation to his speech. Somewhere beyond the gym walls, the enemy was advancing. Somewhere beyond those walls, death was coming. And Marcus Washington, the man they'd ignored for years, was about to lead these kids into battle. The fluorescent lights flickered ominously as Marcus led his hand-picked team through the deserted science wing. The usual hum of classroom activity replaced by an eerie silence broken only by the distant echoes of gunfire and the occasional muffled scream that sent shivers down the spines of the students trailing behind him. Darius Johnson moving with surprising stealth for his size, Zoe Chun cataloging every detail with her photographer's eye, Jamal Williams sticking close to Marcus like a shadow, and Katie Alvarez keeping the younger students calm with whispered reassurances that sounded more confident than she felt. The chemistry lab door stood slightly ajar, the acrid scent of spilled chemicals mingling with the coppery tang of blood from somewhere down the hall, and Marcus signaled for silence with a raised fist before easing the door open, his rifle sweeping the room in a practiced arc. Empty, but showing signs of hasty departure, beakers shattered on the floor, lab stools overturned, an abandoned backpack spilling textbooks across a workstation. Clear, he murmured, ushering the group inside before securing the door behind them with a length of wire from his pocket, a makeshift alarm that would sing if anyone tried to follow. Dr. Phillips, the chemistry teacher who'd been hiding under her desk since the lockdown began, emerged with wide, terrified eyes that narrowed in recognition as she took in Marcus's tactical gear. Mr. Washington? What in God's name? But Marcus cut her off with the same no-nonsense tone he'd used on battlefields halfway across the world. We need to turn this lab into an armory, document non-lethal options only, smoke irritants, anything that can slow them down or obscure movement. To her credit, Dr. Phillips didn't hesitate. Years of teaching bored teenagers the explosive potential of household chemicals had prepared her for this surreal moment, and within minutes she was moving through the lab with purposeful strides, pulling bottles from shelves with the precision of a combat medic selecting supplies. Ammonium nitrate from the fertilizer experiments, she muttered, handing a container to Darius, whose football-calloused hands swallowed it whole. Mixed with sugar, it makes a decent smoke bomb. Zoe was already at the computer, pulling up chemical compatibility charts while Jamal and Katie organized the growing pile of supplies into categories Marcus recognized all too well: incapacitants, obscurants, distractions. The students worked with quiet efficiency, their initial terror sublimating into focused determination under Marcus's steady guidance, transforming beakers and Bunsen burners into tools of resistance. Remember, Marcus said as he demonstrated how to fashion a delayed fuse smoke device using test tubes and rubber stoppers, we're not trying to kill anyone. We're buying time and creating opportunities to escape. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, a man who'd spent 2 decades mastering the art of lethal force, teaching kids how to wage war without bloodshed, but the haunted looks in their eyes told him they understood the grim calculus of survival just fine. Down the hall, in the nurse's office, a makeshift medical station was taking shape under the direction of the school nurse, Ms. Rodriguez, whose usual domain of bandaging scraped knees and dispensing ice packs had suddenly expanded to include triage protocols she'd only ever read about in disaster preparedness manuals. Marcus left Dr. Phillips in charge of the chemistry lab team and slipped into the medical bay, his sharp eyes assessing their progress, gurneys lined up against the wall, cabinets rated for every bandage and antiseptic, the defibrillator checked and ready. "We'll need burn dressings," he told Ms. Rodriguez, his voice low as he nodded toward the chemical supplies being prepared down the hall. "And splints. If we have to move injured people through tight spaces, we'll need to stabilize them first." The nurse, a normally cheerful woman in her 50s, looked at him with an expression that mixed horror and awe. "Who are you really, Mr. Washington?" Marcus didn't answer, just handed her a roll of duct tape and showed her how to fashion an emergency splint from textbooks and lab rulers, their hands brushing briefly in the process, hers trembling, while his remained steady as stone. Back in the chemistry lab, the team had produced a small arsenal of improvised devices, glass jars filled with volatile mixtures that could create blinding smoke when shattered, spray bottles loaded with irritant solutions to temporarily disable attackers, even rudimentary flashbang devices using magnesium strips and aluminum powder. "They won't win any beauty contests," Zoe remarked as she carefully labeled each creation with masking tape, "but they should do the job." Marcus was inspecting a particularly clever device Jamal had engineered, a fire extinguisher rig to release its contents remotely when tripped, when the security monitor Dr. Phillips had kept running in the corner suddenly showed movement. Everyone froze as the grainy black and white image displayed 4 armed figures moving down the math wing hallway in perfect diamond formation, their weapons sweeping methodically as they checked each classroom. Marcus's stomach turned to lead. That wasn't the behavior of panic shooters or even well-trained mercenaries. That was textbook military room-clearing procedure, the kind drilled into soldiers through endless repetition. "They're not just ex-military," he murmured, more to himself than the others. "They're current. That's an active tactical team out there." The implications settled over the group like a suffocating blanket. This wasn't some random attack, and the rules of engagement had just changed dramatically. Darius, who'd been watching the screen with growing unease, pointed suddenly. "They're marking doors." Sure enough, one of the figures was placing small, colored stickers on each classroom they cleared, a system Marcus recognized all too well. Green for cleared, red for targets, yellow for potential hazards. "They're cataloging the school," Marcus realized aloud, his mind racing. "This isn't just an attack, it's an operation." The pieces clicked together with terrible clarity, the military precision, the jam communications, the systematic approach. Whoever these people were, they weren't here just to kill. They were here to send a message, to make Westfield High a case study in terror. The students around him had gone pale, the reality of their situation sinking in deeper than any pep talk could reach, but Marcus saw something else in their eyes too. A spark of defiance, the same stubborn resilience that made teenagers believe they could change the world. "All right," he said, straightening up and locking eyes with each of them in turn. "New plan. We know how they're moving now, which means we can predict their next steps." He grabbed a dry erase marker and began sketching on the lab's whiteboard, his lines sharp and sure. "Here's where they are now, which means in about 15 minutes, they'll hit this intersection near the library. That's where we set our first ambush." The room fell silent as Marcus outlined his strategy, the students leaning in with rapt attention as he transformed chemistry equations into battle plans, beakers into weapons, fear into fuel. Outside these walls, professional soldiers were hunting them. Outside these walls, death was methodically working its way through the school. But in this moment, in this makeshift war room that smelled of ammonia and adrenaline, Marcus Washington was giving these kids the most valuable lesson they'd ever learn: how to survive. The AV room hummed with the quiet intensity of Zoe Chen's focused breathing as her fingers flew across the keyboard in the dim blue glow of multiple computer monitors, the only light source in the cramped space where she'd barricaded herself when the first shots rang out. What had begun as a desperate hiding place had transformed into a command center of sorts. The school's security system still obediently feeding data to her workstation despite the attackers' attempts to shut it down. Around her, the usual clutter of audiovisual equipment, projectors, speakers, tangled cables, had been pushed aside to make room for her improvised operation, her personal laptop patched into the school's network through a back door she'd secretly installed months ago during a particularly boring pep rally setup, a hack she'd never imagined would one day mean the difference between life and death. The door rattled suddenly, and Zoe's heart leapt into her throat, her hand freezing over the mouse as she stared at the locked entrance, the blood pounding in her ears, drowning out everything except the terrifying possibility that the attackers had found her. Then Marcus's voice, low and urgent, cut through the fear. "Chun, it's Washington. Open up." The relief was so visceral it nearly buckled her knees as she scrambled to move the heavy cart she'd used to barricade the door, her hands shaking not from fear now, but from the adrenaline crash of momentary reprieve. And when the door finally swung open, there stood Marcus in full tactical gear, flanked by Darius and Jamal, their faces streaked with sweat and soot but their eyes alert and focused. "You're a hard girl to find," Marcus said, stepping inside and immediately assessing her setup with a sharp glance that missed nothing. The live security feeds, the network schematics, the chat window where she'd been attempting to contact isolated classrooms. "But it looks like you've been busy." Zoe didn't waste time with explanations, just turned back to her screens and pulled up the most critical information. "They took down the main servers, but I routed through the backup systems in the theater department. I've got eyes on about 60% of the building." The monitors flickered as she cycled through camera feeds, each one revealing fragments of the nightmare unfolding throughout Westfield High. Classrooms barricaded with furniture, teachers huddled with terrified students, dark figures moving methodically through hallways with chilling precision. Marcus leaned in, his soldier's mind immediately processing the tactical implications. "Can you communicate with any of these rooms?" Zoe nodded, pulling up a messaging interface she'd jury-rigged using the school's intercom system. Text only, and only to rooms with working PA panels, but yeah. Marcus didn't smile, but something in his posture relaxed slightly. "Good. Tell every room you can reach to stay put, stay quiet, and wait for my signal." As Zoe began typing, Jamal and Darius took up defensive positions near the door, while Marcus studied the camera feeds with growing unease. His experience died picking up details that even Zoe had missed, the way the attackers moved in coordinated teams, the specific hand signals they used, the disturbing efficiency with which they cleared each area. "This isn't random," Marcus muttered, zooming in on one particular figure, a tall man in tactical gear who stood slightly apart from the others, observing rather than participating, his posture radiating command even through the grainy footage. "There's a pattern here. A strategy." Zoe watched as Marcus's fingers traced invisible lines between camera feeds, his lips moving silently as he pieced together the attacker's movements like a chess player anticipating his opponent's next 10 moves. Then suddenly he froze, his entire body going rigid as he stared at the lead attacker's distinctive gait, the way he tilted his head slightly to the right when giving orders. "I know this guy," Marcus breathed, the words barely audible but carrying the weight of a thunderclap in the small room. "Or at least I know his methods." He didn't elaborate, but the grim set of his jaw told Zoe everything she needed to know. This was personal now, in ways none of them could fully understand. Before she could ask, one of the camera feeds caught movement near the school's main exits, and Zoe gasped as she zoomed in. "Are those?" Marcus's nod was grim. "Explosives. They're sealing the exits." The footage showed shadowy figures placing compact devices at every major doorway, the telltale blinking lights of activated timers just visible in the gloom, and Darius swore softly under his breath. "They're not just trying to keep us in. They're trying to keep help out." As if summoned by the observation, Zoe's police scanner app, a leftover from her brief true crime podcast phase, suddenly crackled to life with a burst of static followed by a dispatcher's tense voice. "All units stand down. I repeat, stand down. Westfield High situation is under control by federal authorities. Possible training exercise. Hold positions until confirmation." The room went deathly silent as the words sank in, their horrifying implication clear. Whoever these attackers were, they had enough influence to manipulate law enforcement response, to spin a mass shooting into some sort of drill gone wrong. "That's impossible," Jamal whispered, but Marcus's expression was bleak with certainty. "It's not just possible. It's textbook. Create confusion, control the narrative, buy time to finish the job." He turned back to the screens, his mind racing as he processed this new variable. With police deliberately held at bay and explosives cutting off escape routes, their window for survival was closing fast. Zoe watched as Marcus's gaze flicked between camera feeds, his tactical mind searching for weaknesses in the enemy's formation. And then suddenly he pointed. There. The east stairwell. They haven't secured it yet because they think it's inaccessible. Zoe pulled up the schematics, her fingers flying, as she cross-referenced the building plans. There's a maintenance hatch behind the vending machines. It leads to the basement tunnels. A plan began to take shape in the tense silence of the AV room. If they could guide isolated groups through the blind spots Zoe had mapped, if they could avoid the patrols Marcus had identified, if they could neutralize the explosives at just the right moment. It was 1,000 ifs stacked precariously on top of each other, but it was all they had. Zoe set to work coding an emergency alert system that could send targeted messages to classroom computers, while Marcus briefed Darius and Jamal on their roles in what was to come. The football player's strength would be needed to move heavy obstacles. The quiet outsider's observational skills would be crucial for spotting threats. Outside their little sanctuary, the attackers continued their methodical sweep, unaware that their prey had just become much more dangerous. As Zoe typed the final commands into her system, she glanced up at Marcus. What now? The former soldier checked his weapon with a practiced motion, his face all hard angles in the monitor's glow. Now we turn their high-tech siege against them. You're our eyes, Chun. Time to show these bastards what happens when you underestimate a bunch of kids and a janitor. The ghost of a smirk touched Zoe's lips as she sent the first batch of encrypted instructions through the school's crippled network, a digital rebellion blooming in the heart of their enemy's carefully constructed trap. The weight of the moment settled over the gathered football players like a physical presence as Marcus Washington stood before them in the dim glow of the chemistry lab's emergency lighting, his tactical gear making him nearly unrecognizable as the quiet janitor they'd ignored for years, his voice low but carrying an undeniable authority that had even Coach Owens standing at attention. "Listen up," Marcus began, his sharp eyes scanning each face. Darius Johnson with his natural leadership barely masking his fear, Jamal Williams watching with quiet intensity, the other players shifting nervously, beholding their ground. We're not waiting for them to come to us anymore. We're taking control of this building, one choke point at a time. With quick, precise movements, he sketched a map of the school on the whiteboard, marking key intersections and stairwells with a soldier's understanding of terrain, dividing the players into 4 teams. Alpha would hold the main hallway leading to the gym where most students were sheltering. Bravo would secure the science wing's access points. Charlie would guard the route to the basement tunnels that were their best hope for evacuation. And Delta, the fastest and most agile players, would serve as mobile reserves to reinforce any threatened position. The players absorbed their assignments with surprising focus, their athletic discipline translating well to this sudden shift from football plays to battlefield strategy, and Marcus saw the exact moment when their fear began to transmute into something more dangerous, determination. "Remember," he said, handing out makeshift weapons they'd assembled from chemistry lab supplies, fire extinguishers repurposed as close-quarter weapons, aerosol cans rigged as temporary flamethrowers, heavy textbooks taped into makeshift shields. "You're not trying to be heroes. You're buying time. Hold your positions, watch your angles, and if things go bad, fall back to the next defensive line." The players nodded, their young faces setting grim masks that made them look both older and heartbreakingly young all at once. And as they moved out in their assigned teams, Marcus took a moment to watch them go. Kids who should be worrying about prom and playoffs now walking into combat with the courage of seasoned soldiers. Marcus himself took point with Team Alpha, moving silently down the main hallway toward the critical intersection near the library, his senses hyper-alert to every creak of the building, every distant sound that might signal approaching danger. Darius followed close behind, his massive frame moving with surprising stealth, his hands clenched around a fire axe they'd liberated from its emergency case. "You ever done this before?" the quarterback whispered, his voice barely audible, and Marcus didn't look back as he responded, "Too many times. Just never in a high school." The irony wasn't lost on either of them, but there was no time for reflection as Marcus suddenly raised a fist, freezing the team in place. A shadow had moved at the far end of the hallway, the unmistakable silhouette of a rifle barrel briefly visible around a corner. Marcus signaled for absolute silence, then gestured for the team to hold position as he melted into the shadows near a row of lockers, his movements so fluid he seemed to disappear before their eyes. The attacker came into view moments later. A masked figure in tactical gear, moving with professional caution, but lacking the hyper-awareness that came from real combat experience, his rifle sweeping lazily as he checked classrooms. Marcus waited until the man passed his hiding spot, then struck like lightning, one hand clamping over the attacker's mouth while the other drove a carefully aimed pressure point strike to the neck, dropping the man without a sound. The entire encounter lasted less than 3 seconds, a perfect demonstration of controlled violence that left the watching football players staring in stunned silence as Marcus lowered the unconscious attacker to the ground and swiftly confiscated his weapons and radio. Darius was the first to find his voice. "Holy shit," he breathed, his eyes wide as he took in the efficient brutality of Marcus's takedown, the way the janitor's hands moved with automatic precision as he checked the attacker's gear, and in that moment, whatever lingering doubts the players had about their unlikely leader evaporated. This was no ordinary custodian. "Eyes up," Marcus murmured, handing the confiscated rifle to Darius with a warning look. "Safety's on. Don't touch the trigger unless you mean to use it." The weight of the weapon in his hands seemed to sober the young athlete, his grip adjusting instinctively as Marcus turned his attention to the attacker's radio, where hushed voices exchanged terse updates in what sounded like military jargon. The team gathered close as Marcus listened, his brow furrowing. "They're not just clearing rooms," he muttered after a moment. "They're searching for something. Or someone." The implications hung heavy in the air. This wasn't a random attack, and their strategy would need to adjust accordingly. A burst of static preceded a new voice on the radio, this one colder, more authoritative. "All teams converge on Sector 7. Principal's office is priority 1. Package must be secured." Marcus's head snapped up, his eyes locking on to Darius. "Coleman. They're after Coleman." The realization changed everything. Marcus had assumed the attackers were there for maximum casualties, but this was something more targeted, more personal, and as he mentally reviewed the school's layout, a new horror dawned on him. "The security features," he breathed, his voice tight with sudden understanding. "They're using them against us." Westfield High's hidden defenses, the reinforced doors that could seal off sections, the panic rooms designed to protect students, the centralized control in the principal's office. All of it could be turned into a prison rather than a sanctuary if the attackers gained control. The radio crackled again. "All exits are sealed. Detonation on my mark only." They were trapped in a building that had been designed to protect them, but was now being weaponized by their enemies, and Marcus knew with cold certainty that their window to fight back was closing fast. "Change of plans," he said, turning to the team with renewed urgency. "We need to retake the principal's office before they lock this place down completely." The football players exchanged nervous glances but nodded, their trust in their unlikely commander now absolute, and as Marcus led them down the hallway toward what he knew would be their toughest fight yet, the school's intercom suddenly crackled to life. Not with the attackers' voices, but with Zoe Chen's, her message brief and coded but unmistakable in its meaning. "All teams, execute Plan B now. I repeat, execute Plan B now." The signal they'd agreed upon if things were going south fast. Marcus didn't hesitate. "Move out," he ordered, and the students followed without question, their footsteps echoing through the halls of a school that had become a battlefield, their janitor-turned-commander leading them into the heart of the storm. The weight of the master key ring in Marcus's hand felt heavier than usual as he stood at the junction of 3 hallways, each leading to different sections of Westfield High now crawling with armed intruders. These keys had been his daily companions for years, tools of his trade as unremarkable as the mop and bucket he'd pushed through these same corridors countless times before, but now they represented something far more vital: survival. His fingers traced the familiar shapes automatically, the square one for the gym storage, the rounded one for the science wing, the slightly bent one that always stuck in the drama club's lock. Each key a memory, each memory now a potential lifeline. A flashback surfaced unbidden. His first week on the job 5 years ago, walking every inch of this building after hours, testing every door, every lock, not out of duty, but out of a soldier's ingrained need to know his terrain better than his own heartbeat. He'd mapped emergency exits like escape routes from an enemy compound, noted which windows opened silently and which groaned with disuse, memorized the maintenance tunnels that webbed beneath the school like arteries, knowledge that had seemed like overkill at the time, the paranoid habits of a man who couldn't leave the war behind, but now stood between these kids and slaughter. The distant rattle of gunfire snapped him back to the present, and Marcus turned to the small group of student leaders gathered around him. Darius with his quarterback's steady gaze, Zoe clutching her laptop like a shield, Jamal watching the shadows with new awareness, Katie holding a first aid kit with white-knuckled determination. "We're splitting up," Marcus said, his voice low but carrying absolute authority as he began distributing keys to each of them. "Chun, you get the theater kids out through the costume storage tunnel. Johnson, take the football team and clear a path to the boiler room access. Williams, you know the blind spots. Get as many as you can to the chemistry lab safe zone." Each key changed hands with the gravity of a sacred trust, the metal catching the emergency lights glow as if charged with some invisible power. Darius surprised Marcus then. Instead of simply accepting his assignment, the young athlete began coordinating with the others, his voice steady as he pointed out which classrooms still had students trapped, which routes would be safest for each group, his natural leadership emerging not as arrogance, but as calm competence. "The freshman wing is closest to the drama tunnels," Darius said, his finger tracing the air, as if drawing plays, "so Zoe's team should hit that first. Jamal, you're fast. If you loop around through the locker rooms, you can flank anyone watching the main hallway." Marcus watched this unfold with a strange tightness in his chest. These weren't soldiers, weren't trained operatives, just kids rising to an impossible moment with courage that humbled him. And when Darius finished and looked to him for approval, all Marcus could do was nod and say, "Good plan. Make it happen." The teams moved out like shadows, their footsteps nearly silent on the linoleum, and for a brief moment, the school felt alive with possibility rather than terror. The illusion shattered when a burst of gunfire echoed from the math wing, followed by panic screams that sent Marcus sprinting toward the sound, his weapon up and ready. He found chaos, a group of sophomores and their history teacher, Mr. Reynolds, trapped in a dead-end hallway, the teacher clutching a bleeding leg as he tried to shield his students from an approaching attacker. Marcus engaged without hesitation, 2 precise shots that sent the gunman diving for cover, buying just enough time to herd the students toward an emergency exit, but Reynolds couldn't move fast enough, his face pale with pain as he waved Marcus on. "Take them. I'll slow him down." The decision should have been easy. Military training screamed to prioritize the many over the one. But as Marcus looked into the teacher's eyes, he saw the same determination he'd seen in soldiers holding the line against impossible odds, and the choice tore at him in ways he hadn't expected. 30 seconds, Marcus growled, shoving the nearest student toward Darius. "Get them to the safe zone. I'll be right behind you." Then he was moving back toward Reynolds, his mind already calculating extraction routes even as more gunfire peppered the walls around them. The attackers adapted with alarming speed. Just as Marcus reached Reynolds, the school's PA system crackled to life with a voice that wasn't Zoe's. "All teams converge on Sector 4. They're using the maintenance tunnels." The blood in Marcus's veins turned to ice. How did they know? Those tunnels weren't on any public blueprints, weren't even known to most faculty. Reynolds groaned as Marcus hauled him up. They sound like they know the place," the teacher gasped, and Marcus's grip tightened as the terrible truth settled over him. This wasn't just an attack, it was an inside job. Someone had given these men the school's secrets, had told them where to hit, how to move, where students would run. The realization changed everything. Their carefully planned escape routes might be compromised, their safe zones might be traps. As Marcus half-carried Reynolds toward an alcove, his radio crackled with Zoe's voice, tight with panic. "Marcus, they're in the system. They're locking down then static." The keys in his pocket suddenly felt like a ticking clock. What good were escape routes if the enemy knew them all? The school's defenses, the very features he'd helped design to protect, were now being turned against them, and as Marcus looked down at the wounded teacher, then toward where the students had disappeared, he understood with chilling clarity. The keys weren't just for opening doors anymore. They were for rewriting the rules of engagement. The school's PA system crackled to life with a burst of static that made every hiding student flinch, followed by a voice that carried none of Zoe Chen's earlier urgency, but instead dripped with cold amusement. "Sergeant Marcus Washington." The voice drawled, the familiarity with which it spoke Marcus's name sending ice down the spines of those who knew him only as their quiet janitor. "Did you really think I wouldn't recognize your handiwork? Those choke points, those tactical retreats, that's your signature, brother." In the dim glow of the AV room where Marcus had regrouped with his core team, every eye turned toward him, their expressions a mix of shock and dawning realization as the voice continued. "Though I gotta say, training high school kids to fight? Even for you, that's low." The words triggered a flashback Marcus had fought for years to suppress, A moonlit compound in eastern Syria, his Delta team moving like shadows through the night. Their target a high-ranking officer turned warlord, but the intelligence had been bad, the compound full of civilians, and when the smoke cleared, only 2 men had walked away with blood on their hands but their souls intact, Marcus and Corporal Eli Vance. The latter discharged soon after for unstable behavior, his file stamped with warnings Marcus had ignored because war-forged bonds, even madness, couldn't always break. The memory faded as the present voice, Eli's voice, resumed over the speakers, now laced with something darker. Here's what's going to happen, old friend. You're going to come to the principal's office, alone and unarmed, or I start executing hostages every 5 minutes. Starting with a pause, then the muffled sound of struggle before a terrified girl's voice came through. P, please, I just want to go home, and Marcus's stomach clenched as he recognized Katie Alvarez's voice, the student council president who'd been coordinating evacuations just an hour before. The transmission cut abruptly, leaving a silence so profound Marcus could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. Darius was the first to break the silence, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. You know this guy? The accusation and the question hung heavy between them, but Marcus didn't flinch, his face a mask of stone, as he nodded. Eli Vance. We served together. He wasn't right after Syria. The understatement tasted bitter on his tongue, but there was no time for full explanations, not with the clock now ticking toward Katie's death. Across the room, Principal Coleman, who'd fought his way to their position after the attackers took his office, stepped forward, his military bearing reasserting itself despite the blood staining his sleeve from a graze wound. This changes nothing. We stick to the plan, retake the control room, disable the lockdown protocols. His eyes locked onto Marcus's. We don't negotiate with terrorists. The words were doctrine textbook perfect, but Marcus saw the flicker of doubt beneath them. Coleman knew, as well as he did, that doctrine hadn't been written for situations where the enemy knew every play in your book. It changes everything, Marcus countered, his voice low but iron-hard. Eli doesn't just want the school. He wants me. Wants you. This is payback for what happened after Syria, when they drummed him out, and you signed the papers. The realization settled over them like ash. This wasn't just an attack. It was a reckoning years in the making, with Westfield High and everyone in it as collateral damage. The team watched the silent standoff between the 2 veterans, the air thick with unspoken arguments. Coleman's strategy was sound militarily, but Marcus knew Eli would make good on his threat, would take pleasure in killing Katie and every other hostage unless he got what he wanted. Jamal broke the stalemate in his usual quiet way. There's a third option, he murmured, pointing to an ancient landline phone mounted on the AV room wall, its cord dusty from disuse. They cut the main lines, but this runs on old copper wiring separate from the network. Might still work. Marcus was at the phone in 2 strides, lifting the receiver with bated breath. The dial tone was the sweetest sound he'd heard in hours. Police will be compromised, Coleman warned. Eli's got someone on the inside stalling them, or we'd have SWAT teams rappelling through the windows by now. Marcus's fingers hovered over the dial pad as a new plan formed. Not the police, not the feds, but someone else, someone Eli wouldn't expect. With quick, precise movements, he punched in a number he hadn't called in 5 years but could never forget, each digit a step further down a path he'd sworn to leave behind. The line rang once, twice, then a familiar voice answered with professional crispness. Operator 47, verify clearance. Marcus took a deep breath and spoke the words he'd hoped would never again pass his lips. This is retired Sergeant Marcus Washington, Delta 59 Zulu. Authenticate Sierra Victor 9. I need immediate QRF to my location. The pause on the line stretched for one endless second before the operator responded, the professionalism in her voice now edged with something like relief. Authenticated. Welcome back, Sergeant. What's your situation? As Marcus relayed the essentials, hostage situation, military-trained hostiles, compromised local law enforcement, he became aware of the stunned silence behind him, the students and even Coleman staring at him as if seeing him for the first time. The janitor who fixed leaky faucets and mopped floors was gone. In his place stood a soldier who could summon unseen forces with a phone call, a man whose past had just collided violently with his present. The operator's voice was calm but urgent. ETA 20 minutes. Hold your position. Marcus hung up slowly, the weight of what he'd just done settling over him. He'd broken cover, called in markers from a life he'd buried, all for kids he'd sworn to protect. Coleman's expression was unreadable. They won't make it in time to save the hostages, he said quietly, and Marcus knew he was right. The clock on Katie's life was still ticking, Eli's ultimatum still looming. Outside the AV room, the sounds of the attackers searching room to room grew closer, their voices sharp with purpose. Marcus looked at the faces around him, Darius's raw determination, Jamal's quiet resolve, Zoe's tech-savvy cunning, and made his choice. "Change of plans," he said, stripping off his tactical vest and handing it to Darius. "I'm going to the principal's office. The rest of you get to the boiler room tunnel and wait for my signal." Coleman grabbed his arm. "That's suicide," he hissed, but Marcus shook him off. "No, it's a distraction. Eli wants me. He gets me. While he's focused on that, you get those kids out." Their eyes locked in silent communication only soldiers could understand. Sometimes the mission required sacrifice, and sometimes that sacrifice was yourself. The old landline rang suddenly, shrill and unexpected, making everyone jump. Marcus snatched it up. "Washington." The voice on the other, and wasn't the operator's but a man's, deep and rough with an accent Marcus recognized immediately. "Long-time brother." Marcus's blood ran cold. Somehow, impossibly, Eli had found out about the call, had tapped a line that shouldn't have been tappable. The realization confirmed Marcus's worst fear. Eli had inside help far beyond just local law enforcement. "You always were a step ahead," Marcus admitted, buying time as he gestured frantically for Zoe to trace the call. Eli's chuckle was devoid of warmth, "and you always played the hero. So here's the new deal. You've got 10 minutes to get to my position, or the Alvarez girl dies screaming. And Marcus." A pause, then, "Come alone, or I'll know." The line went dead, leaving Marcus standing there with the receiver in his hand, and the certain knowledge that Eli wasn't bluffing. The man he'd once called brother had crossed lines even war shouldn't justify, and now the only way out was through. As he set the phone down, Zoe looked up from her laptop, her face pale. "I couldn't trace it, but he's monitoring systems he shouldn't have access to. Like he's got backdoors into everything." Marcus nodded, his mind already racing through options. Eli had planned this meticulously, but every plan had weak points, even one's years in the making. "Get everyone moving," he ordered, checking his sidearm with practiced ease, "and when the cavalry arrives, tell them to follow the screams." With that, he turned and stepped into the hallway, the janitor's keys in one pocket and a grenade in the other, walking toward what might well be his last stand with the same quiet resolve he brought to mopping floors, one step at a time, until the job was done. The fluorescent lights in the makeshift command center, formerly the AV room, flickered ominously as the siege stretched into its sixth grueling hour, the air growing thick with sweat and fear, and the acrid tang of spent adrenaline, the once neat whiteboards now covered in frantic scrawls marking enemy positions, wounded students, and dwindling supplies. Marcus Washington wiped a hand across his brow, the grime of battle mixing with the exhaustion etched into every line of his face as he surveyed the room. Darius Johnson slumped against a cabinet, his football jersey stained with dirt and someone else's blood, his usual boundless energy reduced to hollow-eyed determination. Zoe Chen typing furiously on her laptop despite the tremors in her hands, her once precise keystrokes now clumsy with fatigue. Jamal Williams sitting unnaturally still in the corner, his gaze fixed on some middle distance where none of them could follow, his fingers methodically tightening and loosening around the grip of a pistol he'd taken from a fallen attacker. The initial rush of defiance had faded into something more fragile, more human. These were kids, Marcus reminded himself with a pang that cut deeper than any bullet, kids who should be worrying about homework and heartbreaks, not triaging wounds or counting how many bullets remained in their scavenged weapons. A soft groan from the corner drew his attention. One of the freshmen, a skinny kid whose name Marcus couldn't recall, curled around a makeshift bandage on his thigh, his breath coming in shallow gasps as shock set in. They'd run out of proper painkillers hours ago, and the bottle of expired ibuprofen from a nurse's office did little to dull the edge of such injuries. The thirst was worse. Lips cracked, tongue swollen, the school's water supply cut off when the attackers sabotaged the main lines, leaving only what little remained in abandoned water bottles and the emergency supplies Marcus had stashed in the maintenance tunnel's years before for exactly this kind of scenario, though even in his most paranoid moments he'd never truly believed he'd need them. Food had become a distant memory, stomachs growling loud enough to sometimes drown out the distant gunfire, the vending machines long since emptied of anything edible, their glass fronts smashed in the early hours of the siege when hunger outweighed caution. Marcus watched as Zoe absently rubbed her stomach, her eyes never leaving the screen where she monitored the school's dying security cameras, half of which had gone dark as the attackers systematically disabled them, and made a decision. Jamal, he called softly, waiting until the boy's haunted eyes met his. I need you to take a team to the cafeteria storage. Jamal blinked, the first real sign of life Marcus had seen in him since the last firefight, and opened his mouth to protest. The cafeteria was on the opposite side of the school, through territory now controlled by the attackers. But Marcus pressed on. There's a maintenance tunnel that runs under the gym, comes up behind the walk-in freezer. Might still be some water there, maybe even food if we're lucky. He didn't add what they both knew, that it was a suicide mission, that the odds of making it there and back undetected were slim at best, but Jamal surprised him by standing without a word, his lanky frame unfolding with a quiet resolve that reminded Marcus painfully of young privates he'd led into far worse hellholes. I'll take Malik and Run, Jamal said, naming two of the track team's fastest runners, his voice steadier than it had any right to be. We'll move quick and quiet. Marcus wanted to argue, to tell him to wait for a better opportunity, but the whimper from the wounded freshman decided for him. They were out of time. With quick, efficient motions, Marcus sketched a route on a scrap of paper, highlighting the danger points where the tunnels passed closest to known enemy positions, then handed Jamal his own pistol. 2 shots left. Make them count. The weight of the moment hung between them, the unspoken understanding that this might be the last time they saw each other. Then Jamal was gone, slipping into the ventilation shaft they'd repurposed as a hidden thoroughfare, his 2 companions following like shadows. The wait was agony. Marcus forced himself to focus on fortifying their position, directing the stronger students to barricade doors with filing cabinets and desks, while others kept watch through peepholes they drilled in the drywall. But his mind kept returning to Jamal and the others, imagining every possible disaster that could befall them in those claustrophobic tunnels. Darius seemed to sense his distraction and took over coordinating the defenses with surprising competence, his quarterback's mind adapting easily to the tactical challenges, calling out orders in a low voice that carried just enough authority to keep the others moving despite their exhaustion. It was during one of these lulls that the ventilation system suddenly roared to life with a sound like a dying animal, spewing hot, stale air into the room before cutting out entirely. Zoe yelped as her laptop screen flickered, then stabilized with a new warning message. Secondary systems compromised. HVAC failure in sectors 3 through 7. Marcus swore under his breath. The attackers were escalating, no longer content to simply contain them, but now actively trying to make the environment untenable. And he knew from bitter experience how quickly panic could spread in enclosed spaces without fresh air. Already, some of the younger students were coughing, their faces flushed with the first signs of heat exhaustion, and Marcus made another snap decision. We move to the basement, he announced. The old boiler room has its own air supply. The murmurs of protest were immediate but quiet. No one wanted to leave the relative safety of their fortified position, but neither did they fancy suffocating in their own sweat. The exodus was slow and nerve-wracking, students moving in tight clusters with their makeshift weapons held ready, Marcus leading the way with his rifle up, and Darius bringing up the rear, their path lit only by the sporadic glow of emergency exit signs. They were halfway to the basement stairs when the first gunshots rang out, not the controlled bursts of the professional attackers, but wild, panicked firing that could only mean Jamal's team had been discovered. Marcus's heart clenched, but he forced himself to keep moving. The best way to help Jamal now was to get these kids to safety first. The thought had barely formed when a new sound cut through the chaos, the unmistakable thump of an explosion from somewhere near the cafeteria, followed by the sudden rush of water through pipes as the school's fire suppression system activated in that sector. Marcus allowed himself a grim smile. Jamal had done it, had not only gotten the supplies but created the perfect diversion by triggering the sprinklers, and he was about to order the group to hurry when a new sound stopped him cold, the high, keening wail of a teenage boy in unbearable pain, coming from just around the next corridor. Without thinking, Marcus broke formation, motioning for Darius to keep the others moving while he investigated, what he found would haunt him long after this day ended. Jamal lay propped against a locker, his left leg bent at an impossible angle, his face a mask of pain, but his hands steady as they pressed a wad of fabric into Malik's stomach. The younger boy was pale as death, his breath bubbling ominously, his track jersey soaked crimson from a wound no school nurse could fix. Run crouched beside them, her face streaked with tears and soot, clutching 2 intact water bottles like they were holy relics, which, in that moment, they nearly were. They were waiting for us, Jamal gasped as Marcus dropped to his knees beside them, his medic's training taking over as he assessed Malik's injury. Too deep, too messy, the kind of wound that needed a surgical team, not a janitor with battlefield first aid. Knew about the tunnel exit. Ambushed us as soon as we popped the grate. Marcus's hands worked automatically, applying pressure, fashioning a better bandage from his own shirt. But his mind was elsewhere. This wasn't just bad luck. The attackers had known their route, had anticipated their moves with unsettling accuracy. The water bottles rolled forgotten to the floor as Ren suddenly grabbed Marcus's arm, her voice raw, with panic. "They're coming. I heard them behind us." Marcus didn't hesitate, scooping Malik up in a fireman's carry despite the boy's weak protests. He barked orders to Jamal. "Lean on, run, and move." Basement stairs now. The little group stumbled forward, Jamal biting back screams with every step, Marcus's arms burning with Malik's dead weight, their progress agonizingly slow as the sounds of pursuit grew, louder behind them. They reached the basement door just as Darius reappeared, his strong arms taking Malik from Marcus without a word, his face grim as he took in the blood, the broken limbs, the sheer human cost of this endless day. The safe room, a reinforced storage area near the old boilers, was crowded but blessedly cooler, the air marginally fresher thanks to the industrial ventilation systems. Marcus watched as the others tended to Jamal and Malik, as Zoe quietly distributed the precious water in careful sips, as Darius organized a watch rotation despite his own obvious exhaustion, and something in his chest ached with a pain no bullet could inflict. These kids were breaking, their youthful resilience stretched to the limit by horrors no one should ever face, let alone before their 18th birthdays. Jamal's hands shook violently as he tried to drink, the adrenaline crash leaving him trembling like a leaf. Ren sat rocking in a corner, her arms wrapped around herself, her eyes seeing something far away. Even Darius, their rock through all of this, had a hollow look about him, as if some essential light inside had dimmed. Marcus knew the signs. This was battle fatigue setting in, the soul's rebellion against too much violence, too much fear, and he had no idea how to fix it, how to give them back what this day had stolen. The weapons, the tactics, the defensive positions, those he could teach. But how did you teach a kid to unsee death? How did you apologize for forcing them to grow up in a single afternoon? The answers, if they existed at all, would have to wait. The sound of boots on the stairs outside reminded them all that the battle wasn't over, that survival was still an hourly struggle. And as Marcus took up position by the door, his rifle ready, he caught Jamal's eye and saw something that chilled him more than any enemy ever could. Not fear, not even pain, but resignation. The boy had aged a lifetime in 6 hours, and the man who'd inadvertently caused it would never forgive himself. The dim glow of Zoe Chen's laptop screen cast eerie shadows across Marcus Washington's face as he studied the patterns emerging from chaos, red dots marking attacker positions over the past hour, blue lines tracing their patrol routes, all painstakingly reconstructed from fragmented security feeds and student reports whispered through the ventilation shafts. The dots weren't random. They formed a deliberate rotation, a timed circuit that spoke of military discipline, but also of predictability. Every 43 minutes, the hallway outside the math wing cleared as guards switched shifts. Every hour and 15 minutes, the patrol near the cafeteria thinned to a single sentry. Marcus's finger traced the screen, his voice barely above a whisper as he addressed the exhausted but determined faces around him. Darius Johnson with his football player bulk, now honed to a soldier's leanness by hours of tension. Zoe with her ever-present laptop balanced on knees that hadn't stopped shaking since the first gunshot. Jamal Williams propped against the wall with his injured legs stretched stiffly before him, his eyes sharp despite the pain. "They're disciplined but rigid," Marcus murmured, zooming in on a critical intersection near the central administration offices. "See this gap? Right after shift change, there's a 90-second window where we can move unseen." The plan formed as he spoke, each piece clicking into place with the precision of a well-oiled rifle bolt. They'd retake the admin hub, regain control of the school's security systems, and turn the attackers' own infrastructure against them. Katie Alvarez, her face still pale from her ordeal as a hostage, but her voice steady, leaned forward. "Before you go, you need to know, they've got 7 students with severe medical conditions locked in the East Wing classrooms. Asthma, diabetes, 1 kid with a severe peanut allergy." Her hands trembled slightly as she listed names and needs, the student council president's meticulous memory now serving as a lifeline. If we're reclaiming territory, those rooms need to be priority 1. Marcus nodded, committing the details to memory with the same focus he'd once used to memorize enemy bunker layouts, then turned to Darius. "Your team will create diversions here, here, and here." He pointed to key locations on the map. "Draw their attention while we move in from the blind side." The football players transformed before his eyes, where moments before they'd been slumped with exhaustion. Now they straightened, their eyes alight with purpose, their whispered strategizing taking on the cadence of pre-game play calling. Darius divided them into 3 units. Team Alpha would trigger the fire alarm near the gym. Team Bravo would stage a noisy breakout attempt from a supposedly empty classroom, while Team Charlie, the smallest and stealthiest, would slip through the shadows to cut power to the attacker's makeshift command center. The coordination was beautiful in its simplicity, the kind of instinctive teamwork that usually took soldiers months of drilling to achieve, and Marcus felt a surge of pride watching these kids, these young warriors, prepare to risk everything for their classmates. His own team was smaller but no less lethal. Jamal insisted on coming despite his injury, his knowledge of the school's nooks and crannies proving invaluable. Zoe would remain at the comm hub, her tech skills keeping them connected, and Marcus would lead the infiltration team through a maintenance access so obscure even most faculty didn't know existed, a narrow crawlspace behind the auditorium stage, leading to a trapdoor that opened directly beneath the admin office's floorboards. The weapons they'd scavenged from fallen attackers were distributed with quiet efficiency. Marcus with his rifle, Jamal with a pistol and 2 precious grenades, even Quiet Run from the track team armed with a fire axe and a look of grim determination that said she was done running. The operation began with eerie precision. Team Alpha's fire alarm sent a squad of attackers rushing toward the gym, their boots pounding the linoleum just as Marcus had predicted. Team Bravo's stage riot drew another group away from their posts, leaving critical corridors momentarily undefended. Marcus moved like a shadow through the newly created gaps, his team flowing behind him with surprising stealth, their passage marked only by the occasional creak of floorboards or the soft scrape of fabric against walls. The crawlspace was even tighter than Marcus remembered, the dust of years coating their clothes and faces as they inched forward, the only light coming from a penlight clenched between Jamal's teeth. Somewhere above them, voices argued, "I told you, the feed from camera 12 is glitching again." "Then go check it, dumbass." The sound of a chair scraping back, footsteps retreating. Marcus counted to 30 in his head, then slowly lifted the trapdoor just enough to peer into the admin office. Clear. They emerged like ghosts from a floor. Marcus first with his rifle sweeping the room, then Jamal covering the door, Ren securing the computer terminals with Zoe's preloaded USB drives already in hand. The school's security systems flickered back to life under Ren's frantic typing. The monitors displaying camera feeds the attackers thought they disabled. What they saw sent a chill down Marcus's spine. The East Wing was a war zone, classroom doors battered open, students huddled in corners under armed guard, at least 2 bodies lying motionless in the hallway. But it was the central monitor that held Marcus's attention. A tall figure in tactical gear stood over a bound and gagged Principal Coleman, a pistol pressed to the older man's temple as he barked orders to unseen subordinates. The second-in-command, Marcus realized, his jaw tightening, the kind of professional who enjoyed his work a little too much, the type who volunteered for prisoner detail because the screams didn't bother him. Jamal's whisper was urgent. "We've got company coming. Sounds like at least 3. Marcus didn't hesitate. "Run, lock down the East Wing doors by those kids sometime. Jamal, cover the hallway. Give me 2 minutes." The 2 nodded, moving to their positions with quiet determination, while Marcus turned back to the monitors, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he initiated protocols he'd helped design but never hoped to use. Classroom doors locking from the inside, ventilation shafts sealing automatically, panic rooms activating their emergency beacons. The school was waking up around them, its hidden defenses shrugging off the attackers' control like a dog shaking off water, and for the first time since the siege began, Marcus felt the tide turning. The gunfire erupted suddenly from a hallway, Jamal's pistol barking twice, then answering bursts from assault rifles that chewed through drywall like paper. Marcus was moving before the first echo faded, his rifle coming up as he kicked open the door to see Jamal crouched behind an overturned filing cabinet, his face a mask of pain, but his weapon steady as he fired again. The attackers, 3 as predicted, were caught in the open, their body armor no match for Marcus's precise shots that took the first man in the throat, the second in the knee. The third dove for cover, his return fire wild but dangerous, 1 round grazing Ren's shoulder as she worked frantically at the console. Marcus felt rather than heard the grenade roll past his feet, Jamal's last, tossed with perfect precision to land just behind the attacker's cover. The explosion was deafening in enclosed space, the concussion wave rattling Marcus's teeth as shrapnel and smoke filled the hallway. When the dust cleared, the third attacker was down, moaning and clutching a ruined leg, his weapon several feet away. Marcus didn't waste time on mercy. A quick strike with his rifle, but ensured the man wouldn't be getting up. Then he was moving again, toward the sounds of fresh fighting near the east wing. What he found there froze his blood. Darius and his football players had made it further than expected, their diversion turning into a full-fledged assault as they herded panicked students towards safety. But they'd paid the price. 2 players lay motionless near a shattered window, their jerseys dark with blood. A third slumped against a locker, his breath coming in wet, ragged gasps. And standing between them and freedom was the second in command, his pistol now pointed at Darius's chest as the quarterback stood protectively in front of a group of cowering freshmen. The attacker's voice was calm, almost conversational. "Drop the weapon, kid. This doesn't have to end messy." Darius's hand shook but didn't lower the stolen rifle. "Go to hell," he spat, his voice raw with grief and fury. Marcus stepped from the shadows, his own rifle leveled at the attacker's head. He said, "Drop it." The standoff hung suspended for one endless second. 3 armed men in a triangle of death, the air thick with gun smoke and tension. The attacker's eyes flicked to Marcus, recognition dawning. "Ah, the janitor. Vance said you'd show up eventually." His grip on the pistol didn't waver, but something in his posture shifted, a slight turn that put Marcus directly in his line of fire while keeping Darius covered. "Here's how this ends," the man continued, his voice dripping with false reasonableness. "You let me walk out of here with the principal, and these kids get to live. Otherwise—" His meaning was clear as he glanced at the terrified students huddled behind Darius. Marcus's finger hovered over the trigger, his mind racing through scenarios. He could take the shot, was almost certain he could drop the man before he fired, but almost wasn't good enough when kids' lives hung in the balance. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw movement. Jamal, limping but determined, sliding along the wall behind the attacker, a jagged piece of broken glass glinting in his hand. Marcus needed to keep the man talking, keep his attention focused forward. "Vance is using you," he said, his voice deliberately calm. "You really think he's letting anyone walk away from this? You know too much." A flicker of doubt crossed the attacker's face, just for an instant, but was enough. Jamal struck like a viper, the glass shard slicing across the man's gun hand while simultaneously Marcus and Darius opened fire. The attacker went down screaming, his pistol skittering across the floor, his leg and shoulder blossoming crimson where their rounds had found their marks. Darius didn't hesitate, scooping up the fallen pistol. He herded the students toward safety while Marcus covered their retreat, his rifle never wavering from the writhing attacker. Jamal stood panting over man, his makeshift weapon dripping red, his face a mask of conflicting emotions, triumph, horror, and something darker, something that said he'd crossed a line today that could never be uncrossed. The sounds of battle still echoed through the school, but here, in this hallway, the tide had turned. They'd reclaimed critical ground, saved dozens of lives, and proven they could fight back. But as Marcus met Jamal's eyes over the moaning attacker, he knew the hardest part was yet to come. Somewhere in this building, Eli Vance was waiting, and he wouldn't go down as easily as his second in command. The dim glow of the emergency lights in the reclaimed admin office cast long shadows across Principal Coleman's face as he input the final codes into the secure terminal, his fingers moving with the precision of a man who'd practiced this sequence 1,000 times but never expected to use it, the screen flashing red before resolving into a schematic of Westfield High that no blueprints would ever show. A labyrinth of hidden passages, reinforced safe rooms, and most startling of all, a subterranean command center beneath the library that made Marcus's improvised defenses look like child's play. "Project Sentinel," Coleman said, his voice hoarse from hours of shouting orders and the lingering effects of his captivity, the words carrying the weight of a confession long overdue. Post-Sandy Hook, the Department of Education partnered with Homeland Security to design schools that could double as fortresses in case of attack. The screen zoomed in on the library's sublevel, revealing a hardened bunker equipped with enough communications gear to coordinate a small war, satellite uplinks, encrypted radios, even a direct line to the Pentagon's domestic crisis desk. Marcus stared at the display, his mind reeling as pieces fell into place, the excessive federal funding for their renovations, the odd contractors who'd asked no questions and offered no explanations, Coleman's insistence on hiring a Delta veteran as head custodian. "You turned this school into a goddamn military installation," Marcus breathed, not sure whether to be impressed or horrified, while around them the student leaders, Darius, Zoe, Jamal, and Katie, watched in stunned silence, their young faces struggling to process that their ordinary high school had always been anything but. Coleman didn't flinch. "We turned it into a place that could survive exactly what's happening right now," he corrected, pulling up another screen that showed the entire campus divided into color-coded zones, the red areas marking attacker positions that were closing in like a noose. "But to finish this, we need to activate Phase 3, total lockdown with non-lethal countermeasures." The words hung in the air like smoke, ominous and vague, but Marcus knew military euphemisms well enough to hear the unspoken truth. Non-lethal countermeasures meant gas, meant sonic weapons, meant things that wouldn't kill but could maim, could traumatize, could push already terrified kids past the breaking point. "Where are the students in those zones?" Marcus demanded, pointing to the areas that would be hit hardest by Coleman's plan. The gym where dozens still huddled, the East Wing classrooms with their medically vulnerable kids. Coleman's silence was answer enough, his jaw set in the stubborn line Marcus remembered from their last disastrous mission together, the one that had ended both their careers, a nighttime raid in Kandahar where acceptable collateral damage had meant a house full of children who weren't supposed to be there, whose faces still haunted Marcus's dreams. The memory flashed between them like lightning, unspoken but palpable, and Marcus saw the moment Coleman remembered too, the old wound reopening behind his eyes. "We don't leave people behind," Marcus said quietly, the words less a rebuke than a prayer, but Coleman shook his head. "We save who we can. That's the job." The ethical divide between them gaped like a chasm, soldier versus soldier, both trained to make impossible choices, but arriving at different answers, and the students watching this silent battle of wills shifted uncomfortably, sensing the gravity of the moment even if they couldn't name its contours. Zoe broke the stalemate with a quiet gasp. Her laptop, still patched into the school's dying security system, had intercepted a transmission from the attackers' radios. "All teams prepare for final phase. T-minus 15 minutes. Chemical dispersal authorized." The blood drained from Coleman's face. "They've got the same playbook," he whispered, and suddenly the pieces clicked for Marcus. The military precision, the inside knowledge, the way they'd anticipated every defense. These weren't just disgruntled operatives. They were testing the system, probing its weaknesses for some unseen master. "What's in those canisters?" Marcus demanded, already dreading the answer, and when Coleman spoke, each word landed like a hammer. VX derivative. "Neurotoxin. Our version was supposed to be non-lethal, but if they've weaponized it..." He didn't need to finish. Marcus had seen what real nerve agents could do, the convulsions, the foaming mouths, the slow asphyxiation as lungs forgot their purpose. The students looked to him then, these kids who'd followed him through hell, their eyes begging for a solution he wasn't sure he had, and in that moment, Marcus Washington made his choice. Moving faster than anyone expected, he snatched the security card from Coleman's belt and pivoted toward the terminal, his fingers flying over the keys with a veteran's certainty. Washington don't. Coleman barked, but Marcus was beyond listening now, inputting override codes he'd memorized years ago when curiosity had gotten the better of him, codes that unlocked protocols even the principal couldn't access. The screen flashed crimson, final lockdown initiated, and deep within the school's bones, machinery long dormant groaned to life. "What did you do?" Coleman demanded, but Marcus was already striding toward the door, tossing the card to Zoe. "Library now. There's a hidden elevator behind the reference section. Get every kid you can find down to that bunker." The students scrambled to obey, Darius scooping up the wounded Jamal without being asked, Katie grabbing the medical supplies, Zoe clutching the precious laptop that was their only window into the enemy's movements. Coleman grabbed Marcus's arm. "You just condemned everyone outside those doors," he hissed, but Marcus shook him off. "No, I gave them a fighting chance. The gas won't reach the safe rooms if we vent it through the maintenance shafts first." The plan was half-formed at best, a gamble with odds that would make casino balk, but it was the only play they had. As the others fled toward the library, Marcus turned back to the terminal, pulling up schematics of the ventilation system. There was a way, maybe, to redirect the deadly gas through unused tunnels and out the old boiler vents, but would require someone manually overriding the safeties in the most dangerous part of the school. The kind of job only a janitor would know how to do. The radio crackled with Eli Vance's voice, smug and taunting. "Tick-tock, Marcus. You always were soft about the kiddies." Marcus didn't respond, just check his weapon, and headed for the door, toward the toxic gas, toward the armed men, toward the ghost of his past that had come to collect its due. Somewhere in the chaos, a clock was counting down, and Marcus Washington intended to beat it or die trying. The pre-dawn light filtered through the shattered windows of Westfield High. casting long, jagged shadows across the battlefield. The school had become, the air thick with the acrid scent of smoke and sweat and fear as Marcus Washington stood before the assembled student leaders in the library's hidden command center, their young faces drawn with exhaustion, but their eyes alight with a hard-won determination that belied their ages. Around them, the school groaned like a living thing. Distant gunfire still echoed through the halls. The occasional crash of falling debris punctuated the eerie quiet between skirmishes, and beneath it all, the ominous hum of the ventilation system working overtime to clear the last traces of gas from the corridors Marcus had risked his life to purge. The tactical display before them showed the situation in stark clarity. The attackers had consolidated their forces around three key areas: the gymnasium, where scores of students remained hostage, the East Wing, where the medical supplies were stored, and the rooftop access where Marcus knew Eli Vance would be waiting, the man's obsession with symbolic high ground as predictable as it was dangerous. "They're not just trying to kill us anymore," Marcus said, his voice rough from hours of shouting and smoke inhalation, his finger tracing the screen to highlight a series of structural schematics that revealed something even Coleman hadn't known. Buried beneath the school's foundation, encased in concrete when the building was renovated, was a military-grade data vault containing classified designs for Project Sentinel, the very blueprints that could turn any school in America into a fortress or a prison. This was never just about revenge. Eli's here to steal the keys to the kingdom. The realization landed like a hammer blow. Every death, every horror of the past hours had been for a payload that could replicate this nightmare 1,000 times over. And as Marcus looked at the faces around him, Darius with his football jersey torn and bloodied, but his posture still radiating leadership, Zoe with her fingers flying across the keyboard as she worked to decrypt the vault's access logs, Jamal leaning heavily on a makeshift crutch, but his eyes sharp with tactical understanding, Katie moving among the others with quiet words of encouragement and medical checks. He knew the final battle would demand everything they had left to give. The plan formed with the precision of a well-rehearsed play, each student stepping into roles they'd grown into through the crucible of the siege. Zoe would hack into the school's emergency broadcast system to feed false information to the attackers, her fingers dancing across the keyboard with a coder's grace even as they trembled with exhaustion. Jamal, despite his injury, would lead a small team through the maintenance tunnels to plant makeshift noisemakers near the East Wing, creating the illusion of a large force mobilizing where none existed. Katie would coordinate with the trapped students via text messages tapped out on burner phones, preparing them to act when the signal came. And Darius, the golden boy quarterback who become a battlefield commander, would take the football team on what Marcus privately thought of as the most important drive of his young life: a full frontal assault on the gymnasium designed to draw enemy forces away from the rooftop, where Marcus would face Eli alone. The weapons they'd scavenged from fallen attackers were distributed with solemn ceremony. Darius and his linemen took the rifles, their large frames better able to handle the recoil. The track team received pistols with strict instructions to aim for legs rather than kill shots. Even Quiet Run, her arm in a sling from her earlier wound, clutched a fire extinguisher rigged to explode on impact with the grim determination of someone who'd already stared death in the face and refused to blink. Marcus moved among them, adjusting grips on weapons, offering last-minute advice, his steady presence a bulwark against the fear they all felt but no longer showed. These were no longer children, but warriors forged in the hottest fires imaginable, and when he finally gave the order to move out, they went without hesitation, their footsteps echoing through the halls of the school they'd fought so hard to protect. The rooftop confrontation with Eli Vance unfolded with the terrible inevitability of two freight trains colliding. Marcus emerging from the stairwell to find his former brother-in-arms silhouetted against the dawn sky, his tactical gear streaked with grime and blood, but his posture relaxed, almost casual, as if they were meeting for a drink rather than a duel to the death. "Knew you'd come," Eli called over the rising wind, his voice carrying none of the radio's earlier taunting, just a weary acknowledgement of the dance they'd been circling toward all night. Below them, the sounds of battle erupted as Darius's team hit the gymnasium with the force of a tidal wave, the distinct pop-pop of controlled gunfire mixing with the shouts of freed hostages and the enraged screams of ambushed attackers. But Marcus kept his eyes locked on Eli, his weapon lowered but ready. This wasn't a fight that would be won with bullets, but with the truth that had festered between them since Syria. It didn't have to be this way, Marcus said, taking a cautious step forward, his mind racing through scenarios even as his heart ached with the loss of the man Eli had once been, the loyal teammate who'd carried a wounded Marcus 3 miles through enemy territory, the funny bastard who could lighten any mood with a well-timed joke, the idealistic soldier who'd truly believed they were making the world safer. Eli's laugh was hollow, his eyes dead as he gestured to the chaos below. It always had to be this way. You just didn't want to see it. The fight, when it came, was brutal in its intimacy. No glorious exchanges of gunfire, just 2 aging warriors grappling hand-to-hand on rain-slick roofing, each move countered, each feint anticipated, their shared training making them perfect mirrors even as their ideologies made them perfect enemies. Marcus felt Eli's knife graze his ribs, tasted blood where his head had slammed against a ventilation unit, but he also saw the moment Eli hesitated, just a fraction of a second when a shout from below distracted him, the voice of one of his own men screaming that the payload was lost, that the students had somehow secured the data vault. That hesitation cost Eli everything. Marcus's elbow connected with his temple with a crunch that echoed in the quiet dawn, and suddenly the fight was over. Eli sprawled on his back with Marcus's knee on his chest, and a pistol pressed to his forehead, the 2 men breathing heavily as the first true light of morning painted the sky behind them. Do it, Eli spat, his eyes blazing with hate, but Marcus shook his head. That's the difference between us. I don't have to. The distant wail of sirens signaled the arrival of emergency services, finally breaking through whatever blockade had held them back, and with it came the certain knowledge that the nightmare was ending. Not with a bang, but with the slow, grinding inevitability of justice. The aftermath of the siege unfolded in a blur of flashing lights and shouted questions, SWAT teams pouring into the school, with weapons drawn only to lower them in stunned silence at the scene before them, students emerging from hiding places with hollow eyes and trembling hands, their cheers at seeing sunlight again tinged with sobs for classmates who wouldn't be joining them, paramedics rushing to treat wounds both physical and psychological, their stretchers carrying away attackers and victims alike as the line between the 2 blurred in the chaos. Marcus moved through it all like a ghost, declining medical attention to instead help identify the fallen and the missing, his face a mask of stoic calm even as his soul ached with each new piece of bad news. 2 students dead, 7 more critically injured, a teacher who'd thrown himself in front of a gunman now on life support, the human cost of a night no one would ever forget. The media, when they arrived, descended like vultures, their cameras hungry for shots of the blood-stained hallways, their microphones thrust toward anyone who might give them a soundbite, and when they inevitably corner Marcus, his instinct was to fade into the background as he always had, until he saw Darius standing nearby, the quarterback's usual bravado replaced by a quiet dignity that spoke louder than any victory speech. "Don't look at me," Marcus told the reporters, pulling Darius forward with a hand on his shoulder. "Talk to these kids. They're the real heroes." And as Darius began to speak, his voice steady, his words giving credit to every student who'd fought back, every teacher who'd protected their charges, even Jamal who'd crawled through broken glass to save a freshman, Marcus saw the narrative shift in real time, the media's focus turning from sensationalism to something approaching respect for the resilience they were witnessing. In the quiet of the now-empty command center, Marcus found Coleman sitting before the monitors, the principal's usually impeccable suit rumpled and bloodstained, his hands clasped before him as if in prayer. They sat in silence for a long moment, 2 old soldiers surrounded by the ghosts of their pasts, until Coleman finally spoke. "We buried those designs for a reason. Too much power in the wrong hands." Marcus nodded, thinking of the data vault now secured by federal agents, of the 2 students whose names would soon be etched on a memorial plaque, of the hundreds who'd survived but would never be the same. "Maybe some things shouldn't be weapons," he said quietly. And in that moment, the last unspoken tension between them dissolved, the guilt over Syria, the arguments over protocol, the fundamental disagreement about how far was too far to protect what mattered. Coleman stood with a groan, his body protesting the abuses of the night, and extended a hand. "Still the best damn soldier I ever served with." Marcus took it, and the handshake became something more, a mutual pull into the rough embrace of men who'd seen each other at their worst and still found something worth saving. "Back at you, sir," Marcus murmured, and for the first time in years, the honorific carried no bitterness, only respect. The weeks that followed brought changes both large and small. The school board debated tearing down Westfield High before the students themselves petitioned to keep it open, their speeches about reclaiming their space moving even the most hardened officials to tears. The football team, under Darius's leadership, incorporated hand signals and tactical formations from their siege experience into their playbook. Much to the confusion of opposing teams, Coach Owens and Marcus found themselves teaching an unofficial security seminar that quickly became the most popular elective in school. And through it all, Marcus Washington still arrived before dawn, still pushed his mop bucket through the halls, still fixed leaky faucets and stuck lockers. But now, when students passed him, they met his eyes, they said hello, they sometimes even stopped to talk. No longer invisible, just seen differently, not as a hero or soldier, but as a man who cared enough to stand between them and the darkness. On the morning of the school's official reopening, Marcus stood at the front doors as students streamed in, his usual janitor's uniform crisp and clean, his posture relaxed but watchful. Some kids high-fived him as they passed, others offered shy smiles. A few, like Jamal and Zoe and Darius, stopped to exchange quiet words before moving on. When a last straggler had entered, Marcus turned to follow, pausing only to run his fingers over the newly installed memorial plaque in the lobby. 2 names, 2 lives cut short, a promise etched in bronze to never forget. The morning bell rang, clear and bright through the repaired speakers, and as Marcus took up his position by the doors, not hiding, not anymore, he allowed himself a small, quiet smile. The school was alive again, and so was he.